So in this video, I thought it'd be fun if I just sat down and shared with you guys what starter I chose from each generation of Pokemon. And this is a video that I've been wanting to do for quite some time because I just thought it would be fun to just sit down here and give my thoughts on what starter I chose from each region and seeing if I can connect with you guys in some way, because it'd be pretty cool to hear your guys' thoughts as well when it comes to starters that you chose from each generation of Pokemon. So you should let me know all your thoughts on that in the comment section down below. But I'm excited to get into this video, so it's going to be a bit lengthy, but it makes sense given the context of the video because I am going to be going over Gen 1 all the way up until Gen 9. So this is going to be fun, but I'm all here for it. And again, I hope you guys enjoy this video. So the first generation we're going to be talking about today, the generation that started it all for Pokemon. If it wasn't for this region, then Pokemon would have never existed. That region happens to be the Kanto region. And you have the option to choose 3 different Pokemon as starters as you were entering this region for the very first time when you played games like Red and Blue, or you were playing like Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green. The starters that you had options to choose from was Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. And when it comes to these 3 starters, I did use all of them, but the Pokemon that really stood out to me, the Pokemon that I had the most fun with as I was playing throughout the Kanto region, was probably Squirtle. And the reason why I say that is because, well, for one, turtles are one of my favorite animals, so that definitely led to my decision to choose Squirtle. And also, I just had a lot of fun training Squirtle throughout the game, eventually getting Wartortle, getting Blastoise, fighting all these strong fire-type Pokemon and ground-type Pokemon and rock-type Pokemon that Blastoise is very strong against. And it was just a very bulky Pokemon. It carried me through the game quite a bit when I was fighting different trainers, or if I was having those rival battles with Gary, going through each of the gyms throughout the game to get all 8 badges, and of course entering the Elite Four. Blastoise was just one of the Pokemon that always stood by me. Even if I had other Pokemon in that party that went down, Blastoise was just always there, surviving the battle the most, and I just had the most fun with it. So the first starter that I chose when it comes to Pokemon is Squirtle. And it's also very important to me as well, considering that Pokemon Fire Red was my entry into the Pokemon franchise. So I'm obviously always going to look back at the first starter that I ever chose to begin my journey in Pokemon. And again, that was Squirtle. So that's another reason why I'm holding that close to my heart, because if it wasn't for me choosing Squirtle, then I would have never entered the world of Pokemon and played through each of these games that came out throughout the years. So for that, Squirtle, I thank you. And also just thank you for being my buddy going through each of these Pokemon games, especially throughout Kanto. You are a huge help. So moving on to the Johto region, you have the option to choose starters like Cyndaquil, Chikorita, or Totodile. This is a pretty simple answer for me to give you guys because I never used Chikorita or Totodile. The only Pokemon that I ever used in Gen 2 was Cyndaquil, so it's kind of an easy answer to give you guys because that was the only Pokemon I had any sort of experience with. But the reason why I decided to choose that Pokemon to start off my adventure in this region is because, again, I loved the look of the Pokemon. I loved when I got Kolava, and I loved when I got Typhlosion. It was a very speedy Pokemon, so I was always able to hit first, and it learned all these different kinds of fire attacks, which was very useful, which made me think, like, if this Pokemon got a Mega Evolution and it got a Drought ability, I can only imagine how much stronger these fire type attacks that Typhlosion could hit on these like different Pokemon that I was fighting in like trainer battles or gym battles or the Elite Four. I can only imagine like how crazy this Pokemon would be with a Mega Evolution. But Cyndaquil was the Pokemon that I chose in this generation, and even in the Pokemon Legends Arceus game, it was also the same Pokemon that I chose to start my adventure in that game. So those are my reasonings behind choosing that starter. And when it comes to the Hoenn region, I actually used all 3 of these starters. So there's only like a select few regions where I never really used like every single starter. Most of the time it's like maybe 2 out of the 3 that I used. But when it comes to like the earlier generations, I did have my fair share with each of these starters. But the ones that I chose from this region was Mudkip. And you could probably notice a common trend so far when I started off this video where you notice that I chose Squirtle. Now I'm talking about another water type, which is Mudkip. And the reason why I like this one is, well, I liked how I had a starter when it eventually evolved into a Swampert later on. I loved that it had a dual typing, because when you have a Pokemon with a dual typing, it's actually very useful on your team, because when it comes to Swampert, once you eventually get that later in the game when it evolves, its only weakness is grass type moves. So if you throw out Swampert towards like a Pikachu or a Magneton or whatever electric type that you're facing against, it's not going to get affected by any electric attacks, because ground types are immune to electric type moves. So that also makes it very useful as well, because at first when you get Mudkip starting off, electric type moves are super effective towards that Pokemon. So it's nice that now that Pokemon gains an immunity to one of its past weaknesses, because the only dual type Pokemon that we really had in this generation was Blaziken and Swampert when it came to the starters. So those are my reasonings as to why I chose Mudkip in this generation. Now moving on to Gen 4, which you guys know because I made a video before in the past talking about why Sinnoh is my favorite region. And I also discussed, like, you know, the 6 Pokemon that I would take on any adventure before in a video. You guys probably already know the answer to this one. It's Piplup. And I can give many reasons why. I love the aesthetic of the evolution line. Penguins are my favorite animals of all time, so that's definitely gonna persuade me to choose Piplup to start off my adventure. And again, just like I was talking about with Blastoise earlier, when it comes to certain Pokemon that I'm fighting throughout the Sinnoh region, Empoleon is pretty bulky. It could take some good hits. It could learn some pretty cool moves that you could add to its arsenal. And obviously in the most recent games, it gets the competitive ability where if you like throw out any attacks that you want to lower its stats, just increase its special attack. So if it hits you with like a Hydro Pump or an Ice Beam or any sort of special move, because when it comes to special moves and basic physical attacks, you have the special attack being more useful when it comes to Empoleon stats, and you could really hurt a lot of guys as you're fighting each trainer, or if you're going up against different gym leaders, or if you're going up against like the Elite Four or whatever, especially looking at where Empoleon is now in the metagame when it comes to like Generation 9. It's just like a very strong Pokemon. It's also very useful now because of its competitive ability. And I just had a lot of fun with this Pokemon. Like, I used all starters in this one. I used Turtwig, I used Chimchar, I used Piplup. But again, very obsessed with penguins considering they're my favorite animals, and I just had a lot of fun with Piplup in this generation. Like, it's just so cute, and it's just a very fun Pokemon to have as I'm traveling throughout the Sinnoh region, playing Diamond and Pearl or Platinum, which Platinum is also one of my favorite Pokemon games of all time. So it always gave me the best experience whenever I had it by my side. So when it comes to Generation 5, you have the options of Snivy, Tepig, or Oshawott. And I never used Tepig or Oshawott before. I think I did use Oshawott once, but I didn't really make it that far in the game, so that's when I started over and I chose Snivy. But I think the main reason why I chose Snivy is because I wanted a little more speed when it came to my Pokemon. Because the thing about me is I can have a Pokemon that's like slow and stuff like that, and it could be like a heavy hitter whenever I'm throwing it out to fight like a certain Pokemon. But I also really do appreciate speed when it comes to the Pokemon that I choose to add on to my team as well. And in that generation, Snivy was honestly the best option for me. And also, like, when it comes to starters I choose, I'm very specific when it comes to the look of it later on, like once it eventually evolves. And I love the look of Superior. I had a lot of fun with it. I loved using it throughout the game and throwing it out in battle if I was using Coil, or using different kinds of moves to help strengthen its attacks, and also if it's like hidden ability that it has. And whenever I use a Leaf Storm, it just increases my stats so I can actually like have a more powerful Leaf Storm to hit later on. So this was a very fun Pokemon to use in this generation. I had a lot of fun with it. So when it comes to Generation 6, the starters that you had options to choose from was Chespin, Fennekin, and Froakie. And the Pokemon that I chose, which is a no-brainer because I know this one was the popular Pokemon throughout this generation, was Froakie. I mean, if you want to look back at the Kanto region, what was the favorite starter out of that generation? Charmander, because then you see like how much merchandise Charmander is selling and just how popular the Pokemon is as a whole with all the attention that it's getting. That's the same thing with Froakie when it eventually evolves into Greninja down the line. I mean, you got Ash Greninja, you got like this special transformation that Greninja had in the anime, and you also have it being added into Super Smash Bros. You can definitely tell a lot of people really loved that Pokemon, but the reason why I chose that Pokemon as a whole is because I definitely remember when Pokemon X and Y was first being advertised. I do remember when we had these starters revealed for the very first time. Fennekin was actually the fan favorite because when people saw Fennekin, they were like, oh my god, that's going to be the best starter to choose from. I just love the way they look at it. And then whenever they looked at Froakie, people used to just make fun of it all the time because it looked funny and stuff. But after you saw what it evolved into, it's kind of like the pages turned and people were just all over Froakie. And Froakie's pretty much like the best way to say, like, don't judge a book by its cover, because Greninja could become pretty nasty later on in the game when it comes to the sort of build you want to have for that Pokemon, and just looking at the kind of ability that it had, because I believe it had the ability Protein. So whenever it used a certain move in its arsenal, like let's say for example, if it used like an ice type attack, it would turn itself into an ice Pokemon. And if it used a water type attack, it would turn itself into a water type Pokemon. Because back then that ability was very broken, but it's nerfed now, so you can't really do that as much anymore the way that it operated back then. So going to Gen 7 now, you had the options to choose Rowlet, Litten, or Popplio. And the only starter that I used from this generation was Rowlet, because when it comes to me, as I mentioned several times before in this video, aesthetic when it comes to Pokemon is a big thing for me. And when I looked at what Rowlet eventually evolved into when it came to Decidueye later on in its final evolution, I was like, holy shit, this Pokemon actually looks pretty dope. And it was a ghost and grass type, and that's something that I never really expected to see with this Pokemon, because when I was jumping into the Alola region, I personally thought that we were going to end up getting like a grass flying type throughout the entire evolution line. But once you got to Decidueye, it turned into a grass ghost, and I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. So now I'm immune to fire type moves. Now I'm immune to normal type moves. So I don't have to worry about like those moves anymore, which is pretty cool. So let's say, for example, was going to throw a fighting type Pokemon at me. Let's say, for example, it was like Machamp and I had like a Golem. I can always switch out Decidueye, and then the Machamp would end up using a fighting type attack, and it would not affect me because I'm immune to fighting type moves. So it would come in handy whenever I was fighting like certain trainers, or if I was in a competitive battle. So that was the Pokemon I chose in that generation. Now moving on to Gen 8, the options that you had for starters was Grookey, Scorbunny, and Sobble. So the starter I ended up choosing in this generation was Scorbunny because, again, the aesthetic, I loved how Cinderace looked. I like how it was based on like a soccer player. So when you're looking at the Pokemon, it looked exactly like a soccer player. And I also love that Cinderace learned a move later on called Court Change, where pretty much, let's say, for example, if you're in like a competitive battle and your opponent set up like a whole bunch of hazards, so whenever you switch out a Pokemon, they were getting affected by the Stealth Rock or the Toxic Spikes. Let's say if I sent out Cinderace, for example, and I had heavy duty boots on, I would be able to use Court Change to actually transfer all the hazards that I set up in my area back to them. So whenever they decided to take out their Pokemon, they're getting affected by the Stealth Rock and they're getting affected by the Toxic Spikes if they didn't have a move like Defog or any other move to get rid of like those hazards on the field. So it's definitely a Pokemon when it comes to competitive battling, for example, that's very useful with that Court Change move that it has. But that's my reasoning behind that. I just love the appearance, and I just loved how useful that Pokemon was whenever I used it in competitive Pokemon battling. I thought it was fun, and it was just, you know, cute little bunny rabbit. I mean, I can't go wrong with a cute little bunny rabbit. So for Gen 9, the starter that I chose in this generation, which you had the option to choose from Quaxly, Waikoko, and Sprigatito, I mean, there's actually a very interesting story behind this, but the one that I initially chose at first was Quaxly because that was the one I liked the most. As I was playing throughout the game, I started having like a different mindset where I was like, I don't know if I really want to use Quaxly as much anymore. And then that's when I switched to Sprigatito. And like the main reason why I like Sprigatito is because later on when it evolved into like Meowscarada, it actually had a good balance of its attack and speed. So I was like, okay, that can definitely come in handy, especially in competitive battling. And I also just loved, like, you know, the variety of moves it can learn. And I just loved, like, the whole look of it. Like, I thought it looked really cool. And I just had, like, a lot of fun with this Pokemon because, like, whenever I sent it out, like, I always had, like, the best of luck. Because when it came to Quaxley at first, I had some fun with it. And then when I eventually got Quackquavel later on and I went Aqua Step and I was able to increase my speed as I was using that attack, you know, I had a lot of good times with that Pokemon, but it just came to a point where I was like, you know what, I want to switch it up. I want to use a different Pokemon. And then I ended up choosing Sprigatito, and then that's pretty much where everything took off from there. I mean, you could probably see that I have a little plushie of Sprigatito in the background, so that was probably like a little spoiler right there of the starter that I chose that I had the most fun with. So those are my starter choices that I chose from each generation of Pokemon. So giving you guys a quick recap, I chose Squirtle and Kanto, I chose Cyndaquil and Johto, and Hoenn I chose Mudkip, and Sinnoh I chose Piplup, and Unova I chose Snivy, and Kalos I chose Froakie, and Alola I chose Rowlet, in Galar I chose Scorbunny, and in Paldea I chose Sprigatito. So if you notice, like, a little common trend there, I happen to be like a very big fan of water type Pokemon. So just looking back at that now, that definitely tells me like what my preference is when it comes to like certain Pokemon that I chose from each of those generations. But of course, it always varies every time based on how I feel about the certain Pokemon that I'm using and what sort of experiences I have with that said Pokemon. So this was a very big video, and it's definitely going to take some time to edit. So this is going to be a big project for me to take on. So I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. But other than that, if you guys have like any thoughts on like what Pokemon you chose from each generation that you guys want to share with me in the comments, you guys want to give your own little story explaining why you chose that Pokemon and sharing your favorite moments with me with that said Pokemon, be sure to let me know all your thoughts on that in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And also, if you guys want to follow your boy on social media, see what I'm up to on a regular basis, make sure to check out my Twitter, my Instagram, and my TikTok. All of that is located in the description below. Make sure to click on the bell for notifications so you guys are aware whenever I'm uploading a new video on the channel. But other than that, I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, wherever the day may be, if it's the daytime, the nighttime, or the evening. And I'll see you guys in the next video. As always, peace out.